there, this is Cassia.
And this is Coden.
And welcome to the Ebon Hawk, a podcast where we discuss Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, as well as all things Star Wars. Today we will be discussing Project Luminous, the High Republic era, and what that means for the Old Republic. This is episode 17, and this is where the round table begins. First of all, we were talking about Project Luminous. It was revealed on February 24th, 2020, so just earlier this year. Within the official trailer that Lucasfilm, they were saying what Project Luminous is comics and books telling the story in kids' books, teens' comics and books, adults' comics and books. It's telling the story of the High Republic era, which is set 200 years before The Phantom Menace. So it's going to be, kind of telling a consecutive story for, all Star Wars fans. And it's just kind of interesting, because, the earlier rumors were kind of saying, this is going to be 400 years before the prequels, and then, now it's 200 years, but never 300. I found the trailer, it was very prequel chic, so I appreciated that, because, after the sequel trilogy, it was kind of just pretending to some extent that the prequels never happened. It was nice to just kind of see some prequel love again.
Kind of the opening portion of that trailer showed a lot of prequel footage, a lot of scenes of lots of Jedi together. And I think that's what Disney is kind of envisioning the High Republic to be, is Jedi going out in groups as peacemakers. So we'll see how this kind of unfolds and envelops through the next little bit as these release. I'm excited to kind of see what's going on with the books. I'm not a big comic book person. I am curious to see what kind of novels they release off of this. So
yeah, I've kind of been a little bit gun shy with the new Star Wars books, because I read so many of the old expanded universe and knew what, kept up with all the lore and the knowledge, and then all of a sudden, it kind of just didn't matter anymore. So then I was, a little bit reluctant to have to learn new things. So, I'm aware of it, but I just haven't really read it. The last comic book series that was Star Wars that I kind of kept up with was, surprise, surprise, Knights of the Old Republic. I hope it tells a good, consistent story, and I think it's smart to go with something, totally new and unestablished under the original Lucasfilm or Disney Lucasfilm.
It's hard to tell a story that's already been told and have it be accepted by fans. The one book that I picked up and kind of took a glance through over at Barnes & Noble, and it was basically kind of a rehash of some Qui-Gon story and some Obi-Wan story that we already knew, but they retold, which was a bit odd.
Master and Apprentice. Okay, so I think it's Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. There is a book called Secrets of the Jedi, which is Luke Skywalker kind of writing about the Force and all the different Jedis, and it's just kind of funny because there was a book also called Secrets of the Jedi in the old EU about Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin dealing with attachment and how they kind of dealt with it. It was by Jude Watson, so it was interesting to see that title used again.
I was just thinking that's one thing that I'm okay with Disney kind of going with this High Republic era, is because it is going to be something that is less, if not hardly touched at all, other than KOTOR. As long as some core things are kind of held, I think this could be pretty good.
Kind of looking at the High Republic, what they explained, it's a time of relative peace and calm. I was kind of getting a Camelot vibe from it. The Republic's borders and frontier are expanding. It's kind of settling the Great Plains of America, that kind of time. So it's like a little bit of a Wild West, but like there's also like hope and promise. It's kind of like the best version of that, minus, Native American genocide, probably. The Jedi Knights, they kind of describe the Jedi Knights of this era. It's like they're the Jedi Knights of the Round Table. They're kind of wearing like the gold temple attire and like some Jedi adventure attire. And they have some pretty cool looking lightsabers that kind of remind me of this Excalibur.
So this is one of those pieces where I think could go either way with how they tell the story of the High Republic. This is an era where the Jedi Sentinel role shines because of a time of peace and the Sith kind of being pushed back. The Jedi were able to focus on establishing and maintaining peace throughout the galaxy. The Jedi who had more of that role were the Sentinels, where they were the kind of influence on planet and who would relay back to the Jedi Temple.
Because when you get to like the Clone Wars and Rebels, that's where you kind of see they kind of have some vestiges left over, like Jedi Temple guards. It's kind of like a duty, like it's like jury duty, except you kind of guard the temple. You have yellow lightsabers and stuff like that, and like you're kind of dressed up with masks. You can see some of like these reproductions of the masks in Galaxy's Edge. They're pretty cool, but like you kind of feel like the prequel era Jedi kind of lost connection with like the Jedi Sentinel role, and it was kind of more like they only cared about like the consulars and the guardians, and there were less like lightsaber color options available. So it kind of seems like they became disconnected from like some of the deeper traditions that they had. But also, I just wanted to add that Ian McKay, who designed Darth Maul, he was brought on to design some of these looks of the Jedi, the scoundrels, bounty hunters, and the group called the Nile, like space Vikings, which we'll talk about in a second. I guess the story starts with a catalyst called the Great Disaster, and it looks like there's going to be an issue on a space station that looks like Centerpoint Station from the old EU, so I kind of wonder if they'll kind of touch on any old stories like that. They evoke King Arthur and kind of the look in like Jedi Knights of the Round Table, but as you know, or maybe you don't know, but I find this stuff interesting. Like, King Arthur, it ends in tragedy. I mean, Camelot was kind of a golden age. Sometimes, like, when things are prosperous, it leads to, like, stagnation and people kind of becoming weaker. So maybe, like, this High Republic era is kind of what leads to the Jedi becoming corrupted in the prequel era and, like, kind of leads to the rise of the Empire.
That is a pretty good point because the Phantom Menace really kind of tells a story about how that order falls apart. You just kind of have the blind Jedi Council and then it just ends up in ruin by the end of Revenge of the Sith. So
because Ki-Adi-Mundi in the Phantom Menace says like the Sith have been extinct for over a millennia. And I kind of wonder if the Jedi kind of need that presence, like the Sith, to like battle against, to kind of define themselves on. Otherwise, they kind of just stagnate. I kind of wonder if they need each other in a way, like kind of a balance. I do have some concerns about the High Republic. My first is that when you create via a committee, sometimes it turns meh, you know? They had a story group for the sequel trilogy, but that trilogy still had, even if you're a big fan of it, you have to admit like 7, 8, and 9 kind of didn't really build off of each other, and it was inconsistent, and there were things that broke with established lore. And then I also think my second concern is Lucasfilm needs a Lucas-like figure who's like a competent creative who knows and respects and loves the canon of Star Wars the way George Lucas envisioned it, but they also need to be a competent business person, and they also need to work with a team. Lucas wasn't always able to listen to others, which is why Gary Kurtz ended up leaving Return of the Jedi. So, like, I mean, Lucas wasn't perfect in that regard, but, like, he had some outlandish ideas, but, like, when he was able to kind of talk with other people, he was able to kind of refine it, because, or else, if we went with the first version of Star Wars, it wouldn't have worked. Star Wars was saved in the edit.
I think that the reason why it worked out as well as it did was because George Lucas had the overall picture and he knew exactly what he wanted, and
Yeah.
eventually he got there. Like he got what he was capable to get on the initial release of Star Wars, but as technology evolved, he was able to revisit and make adjustments to provide like a little bit more of what he envisioned. And some of those adjustments are great. Some people have issues with other pieces of those adjustments, but they're just pieces that George Lucas wasn't very happy with, and he wanted to improve upon them. And I think that for the most part they do work out fine. But the thing is with the newer way of developing these films is that because there's so many people involved and they all have their own vision of what they want, it ends up just kind of being a creative mess that they try and put together at the end, but it just kind of ends. The Skywalker's re-ending.
I mean, like, Star Wars, like, the reason he made it is, like, I mean, yes, to make money, but he had a story to tell. Like, he felt like he had something he wanted to share, and he felt passionate about it. He had, like, a vision for their 4, 5, and 6, and 1, 2, 3, and he was kind of like the executive or the president of Star Wars. With Disney, Lucasfilm, I think there's a lot of, like, passionate people, but there's no kind of person leading the charge, so it's all consistent. It just seems like some people are like, oh, let's see if that sticks, but I think, like, that kind of approach doesn't work with something like Star Wars. You want high quality adventure stories,
Yeah, and I think that, like, the spin-off films I did like a little bit more than the Skywalker saga because they had a little bit more creative freedom than the Skywalker trilogy did. Though those stories had their own issues, I feel like that they told a kind of better start to finish story than the sequels did.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Rogue One, and, like, for me, Rogue One fits with George Lucas's Skywalker saga.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I didn't really love Solo. There are parts I like about 7, 8, and 9, but it just kind of feels like it's kind of like an alternate universe off of, like, the original trilogy. It doesn't feel like 1 through 9 are one big whole for me. So maybe in the future it will, and it will settle, but I'm not quite there yet. So we'll see what happens, but it's just interesting because the whole reason why George Lucas created Lucasfilm is so a studio wouldn't dictate what he could or couldn't do, and then he ended up selling Lucasfilm to Disney, who kind of dictates what they can and can't do. Anyways, the first entry of Project Luminous will be The Light of the Jedi by Christopher Soule. It is expected August 25th, 2020, and other contributors include Claudia Gray, Justina Ireland, Daniel Jose Older, and Kevin Scott, and there may be others, but those are the ones I was able to track down, and Coden helped me track that down too.
All right, so we did have a couple viewer questions come through. So our first question comes from Plex Armory, and they said, "Do you think we will see Yoda at all?" And that's a pretty good question. The stories would take place in a time where Yoda would be in his prime, and so the question is Disney going to have Yoda? Like, I guess, where are they going to be setting Yoda on the Jedi Council? Will he be there at this time? Or is he going to be in more of the master role, training Jedi on kind of out and about on his own thing? What do you think, Cassia?
I'm kind of reminded of the early Spider-Man comics where Aunt May always wanted to introduce Peter to her neighbor's daughter or niece. I can't really quite remember which it was, but they would, like, Peter and Mary Jane you would never see Mary Jane's face, and it was kind of like a running gag. And then finally, Peter runs into MJ and she said, "Face it, Tiger, you've hit the jackpot." It would be kind of funny if, like, Yoda's in the background, but we don't really see what happens with him. Kind of just after, like, the sequel trilogy, how, like, some of the legacy characters were handled. I really wouldn't want to see too many different interpretations of Yoda because it's such an iconic character, and I think how you see his development through all the films is pretty much perfect. It would be nice to have him in the background, know he's there, but maybe not, like, central character.
Yeah, Disney isn't afraid to bring in a cameo through their production. So, like, I'm highly confident that Yoda will be there in one form or another.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of with you, Cassie. I'd rather a cameo appearance and, like, a background sighting of Yoda and not have, like, a in your face, like, representation of Yoda. There have been people that have done Yoda very well, like the Clone Wars versions of Yoda have all been really good. Like, you know, it's just there's so many different iterations. I think for me, with the story of the High Republic, like, I want to see new stuff for the most part. Like, it would make sense to see a little bit of Yoda, but I want to see a lot of just new people, new stories.
So we'll see how it happens. Like, we have the first blonde Jedi in the center of Christopher Soul's Light of the Jedi. Her name is Avar Kriss. Maybe there's other blonde Jedi, you know, but in the new canon, it feels like this is the first one. So,
you mean she isn't another British brunette?
Yeah, for once, you know, and she's not Rey's mom. So, yeah. So we'll see those new characters, and there's the Wookiee named Augury, so it'll be interesting. A Wookiee Jedi wielding, like, an Excalibur-like lightsaber, so, and we'll be introduced to lots of new characters, so I'm excited. And then we follow this up with the next viewer question. I accidentally misplaced this name. The question came from Instagram. So I'm sorry, whoever it is. Tell me, like, after if it was you, and I'll correct it. This person said, "I'm curious to see if these new Space Vikings are supposed to be a nod to the KOTOR Mandos." So these new Space Vikings, they're called the Nihil. It reminds me of the nihilists I've met in my life, you know, where it's like nothing matters, you know, like. They're Vikings where it's like, you can't take it with you, so we're going to take it from you, like they say in the trailer. I wonder if that's a nod to, like, Darth Nihilus. And if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. I'm still learning my Latin, you know? That's kind of what I thought it was a link to. Like, it's like they're a threat, but they're kind of not, like, you know, like a grade A threat like the Sith were.
Maybe they're going to be similar to the threat that Palpatine foresaw and was preparing for, but whether they're the same thing or if they're something completely different, I don't know.
Well, I mean, this is 200 years before Palpatine, and they're never really mentioned again. I think it's just kind of like they're like space Viking pirates who are just trying to make a quick buck, you know, like as the Republic is expanding their borders, you know, and like, because it's kind of like they kind of mention like the Jedi are kind of like the Texas Rangers. It's like the Old West, you know, like the way Hollywood imagines it, you know, so it's like have to be on your toes, you know, so.
Oh, the unknown regions. Like there's a section outside the unknown regions that has kind of a hostile race that Palpatine kind of learned about and became worried about.
Hazen Vong.
The Husan Vang. It's on I came across it through Generation Tech channel. He was talking about it for a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a race that's been around for much longer than any of these guys, but it was just kind of a threat that was kind of in the back of Sidious's mind as he was coming to power.
Yeah.
But he only really knew about because of his connection with the Sith.
I kind of like a version of Palpatine that just wanted to take over the galaxy and create Death Stars because he was just evil, not because he was trying to save the galaxy. But it's an interesting way to look at Star Wars. But one thing I'm kind of wondering is, what does this mean for the Old Republic? And I came across this comment responding to Star Wars Theory's video reacting to High Republic new trailer. It was from someone named Daniel, and I'll just read his comment. He says, I just have a question. Why are they going with the High Republic that's 200 years before Star Wars instead of the Old Republic, which was 4,000 years before? You can't say there's no source material for this era, and Old Republic is probably the best marketing tool after Skywalker Saga in terms of public awareness. In my opinion, the Old Republic is safer and easier for Lucasfilm to create. The only thing I can think of would be that the High Republic lends itself better to the Marvel formula for movie making and TV shows instead of the traditional trilogy and anthology format, which I'm assuming Lucasfilm is not interested in doing anymore. So what do you think of that, Coden?
So I do kind of agree with what he's saying. I think that there's a lot of really good source material for the Old Republic, I think Disney's more interested in a fresh slate for a Star Wars story, and something that they can like ultra franchise like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The High Republic is something that they could get away with that. And they're starting with books and comics now, which is cheaper to produce and manufacture than like a feature film or a film series or TV show. And I think that this would be a really good test run for Disney to see if there's a large interest in this era of Star Wars, and then maybe later turn it into film or TV show. With the Old Republic, we've discussed this in the past where like they've got two ways they can do it. If they went more of a film or TV show route, they could either tell the story that's told in the video game, or they can tell a story in the world of the video game. And there's like, though they can do it and there's lots of great source material, there's a lot of room to upset some diehard fans like us.
Yeah.
Trying to tell that story just with the piggyback of what people know.
Yeah. I think after the sequel trilogy has been divisive, they just want something like fans can't complain they're like ruining the source material because like it's something that didn't exist. And I kind of don't believe Lucasfilm when they say this isn't going to be a film or TV show or anything. I think if it's successful, like anything can happen. I mean, it's kind of smart what they're doing, but I would like to see the Old Republic adapted one day. And I mean, I kind of keep saying this, but like, I think Knights of the Old Republic, if you make that first game and you divide it into a trilogy, it would be cinematic. People would love it. Even like non-gamers would love it. It just is a Star Wars story. It's not a video game story. It's just a good story, you know, period. And I think like Knights of the Old Republic 2, probably it's also a great story. It's very deep, but I think you would maybe be doing a disservice to make it into a movie or two movies. I think it would be, you could explore the deep themes better and all of the different characters, Kreia, you know, and the Force and just everything in a Disney Plus series, like with multiple seasons. I would love that. It's interesting because Knights of the Old Republic 1, it was kind of like a little bit like The Force Awakens. Like it kind of like uses all of the things that people love about Star Wars. It incorporates like, you know, like an Old Republic, an original trilogy story, but kind of in a prequel universe and like kind of is doing its own thing. But it's like kind of traditional Star Wars. And then Knights of the Old Republic 2, it's kind of like subversive Star Wars, but like kind of good subversive. Like it doesn't like break the fan base, but it just like, it gives you something unique and something deep to think about that like people are still like talking about like Kreia and her philosophy like 16 years later, you know, and it's kind of incredible, you know. And then I also think, like, how would you like this, Coden? Like, after the Clone Wars is done, like, what if they created, like, the Mandalorian Wars kind of as a prequel after Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 have been adapted?
No, I think that'd be good. I know that the live action production things are that they can be pretty hard to set up and get done correctly, and I think that the animation route is a very strong route for like sub stories like the Mandalorian Wars, and so I think that would be a really fun and like really good story to tell that can easily be done through animation.
Some people want to would want to start out like a Knights of the Old Republic movie or something or whatever with the Mandalorian Wars, but I kind of think it's like something, you know, like after the fact. Like, I think you should go on join in the journey of Revan, like how it's established in Knights of the Old Republic, where you, like, it's a process of discovering that truth, you know, rather than just like knowing, like, kind of seeing the Mandalorian Wars and then seeing him brainwashed and then kind of reliving the Knights of the Old Republic story.
Yeah, I think the more that they focus on like a character, I'd like to see. So like if it's a story about like multiple people, I think like a TV show, regardless if it's animated or high production, I think that's where a TV show really shines, is when you want to tell multiple stories with lots of different people and characters.
Yeah.
But as the story focuses in, say like if they did make a KOTOR movie and you're really only following 3 people, then that's when I would rather see a film, whether it's just an animated film or an actual live production film.
Because the way I see it, like, you have your 3 mains, like with Knights of the Old Republic, you have Bastila, you have Karth, and Revan. And then you kind of have some, like, different characters who could, like... I mean, we kind of mentioned in, like, the episode we were talking about Mission. Maybe it's, like, stays on one planet after Terrace, you know? And then joins up for, like, the final Starforge battle. And then, like, different characters kind of come and go, you know? Maybe that could happen. And then with, like, Knights of the Old Republic 2, you kind of have a big crew. But, like, the 3 mains are, like, Atton Rand... Kreia and the Jedi Exile, aka Mitra Surik. Flash forward to the future, in episode 18, we'll be discussing Atton Rand. Brace yourselves. This has been Cassia.
And this has been Coden. And you can find us at twitch.tv/ConanBond. And there I'll be streaming the SOTOR, the Old Republic, Thursday nights. If you want to email us comments or questions, you can do that on the ebonhawkpodcast@gmail.com.
And then our Instagram is ebonhawkpodcast. And if you have any comments or questions, you can leave them there. Our podcast can be found on Spotify, SoundCloud, and iTunes at The Ebon Hawk. We're always grateful for subscriptions and reviews. And our intro and outro themes were composed by Alistair Shorman. He can be found at alistairsounds.wixsite.com/alistairsounds. And our transition music was composed by Christian Walker, and he can be found at christianwalkermusic.com. This has been episode 17 of The Ebon Hawk. May the Force be with you. We'll be back soon. Bye for now.